Elsa Callender was serving her son a plate of beans by the wagon fire when the rider came up along the outside of the circle at dusk, and the trail scout stopped his horse at the fire's edge and took his hat off, and Elsa Callender looked up and did not, for the first 3 seconds, recognize the man she had almost married at 16. Her eldest, Peter, 18, looked up too. He said, mildly, "Evening, sir." The trail scout said, "Evening, ma'am." "Evening, young sir. May I speak with your mother a moment? My name is Jonas Reid. I saw her name on the wagonmaster's list at Fort Kearney, and I have ridden up 2 days at a hard pace so as to be sure to catch her before Oregon City." Elsa Callender set the tin plate down slowly on the wagon board. She was 36. She was a widow of 13 months. Her hair had gone a little gray at the temples in the year since Fred had died. She had 2 grown children and 1 white bonnet, and she had come west with the wagon train because she had needed a country she had not been married in, and because Fred had wanted them to try it before the consumption had settled on him. She looked at the man on the horse. He was 38. His hair had gone gray too. He was thinner than she had remembered. He was the same man. She said, in a voice that came out steady, "Jonas Reid of Coldwater, Kansas." He said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "I thought you had died in a stampede in the summer of '69. It was in the papers." He said, "It was in the papers. It was not accurate. The man was Jonas Reid with an E. The mistake was made in a wire and not corrected before the paper went to press. I have known about the mistake since '70. I have been an easier man to find since '71, but I did not know you had thought I was dead. I would have written otherwise." Elsa said, "I was married in '72. He said, "I know. I do not know when I learned it. I know I have known it a long time." Peter, 18 years old and no fool, looked at his mother, and then at the trail scout, and then at his mother again. He said mildly, "Mother," Elsa said, "Peter, this is a man I once knew as a girl. I have not seen him in 20 years. I did not think he was living. He has a great deal to say, and I have a great deal to hear. Would you take Lucy down to the Landry's wagon for an hour while I speak with him?" Peter said, "Yes, mother." Peter got up. He tucked his sister, Lucy, 15, red-cheeked, curious, under his arm, and walked her toward the Landry wagon 3 fires down. Elsa Callender turned back to the fire. She said, without looking at Jonas Reid, "Get down off that horse, Jonas. Come sit at my wagon fire and drink coffee with me and say what you have come here to say." Jonas Reid got down off his horse. He tied it at the back of the wagon. He came to the fire. He sat on the wagon tongue. She poured him coffee. She poured herself coffee. She set the tin cup between her hands. She said, "Say it." He said it plainly, over the course of an hour, at her wagon fire, while her children stayed politely at the Landry wagon 3 fires down. He said his father Isaac had ridden with Quantrill and had ridden into Lawrence in August of '63, and Isaac had returned home a broken man 3 weeks later and had never spoken of it. Ephraim Roebuck, Elsa's father, had been in Lawrence on the morning of that raid delivering wagons of grain to the granary and had not come home. Elsa's mother, Sarah, had learned within a fortnight that Isaac Reid had been among the raiders. She had forbidden Jonas from setting foot on the Roebuck farm. She had forbidden Elsa to speak to him again. Elsa said, "Yes." He said he had ridden west 2 years after that, because he could not bear a state or a farm his father had ridden through in '63, and because Elsa's mother had been justified in her prohibition, and he had come to know it. He had gone north to Colorado. He had cowhanded 5 years. He had begun to scout for wagon trains in '78. He had never married. Elsa said, "Why?" He said, "Because I had one fiancé, and I could not want another. That is the plain reason. There are prettier ones and better ones, and none of them are the true one." Elsa said, "Jonas." She said it very quietly. He said, "I did not come to press you, Elsa. I came to be truthful. Your husband Fred is 13 months in a Missouri grave. Your children are grown. Your wagon train is 3 weeks out of Oregon City. I have known where you were for 6 months, because a Missouri cattleman I ran cattle with in '70 told me his cousin had married a callender in St. Joseph and that Callender had died last spring, and the widow had signed up with a wagon train. I have been thinking about your name for 6 months. When I saw it in the wagonmaster's list, I had to come, or I would have never forgiven myself for not. Elsa said, "You came for what, Jonas?" He said, "I came to see if you would let me ride the last 3 weeks alongside your train as the trail's second scout, and I came to see if, at Oregon City, you would let me speak with you again about a life we did not get to have 20 years ago. I have my own small holding at Blue Cove, Oregon, an hour out of Oregon City. I could offer it to you and your children, or I could offer to move to whatever place you and your children choose. I came to say those things. That is all." Elsa Callender sat at her wagon fire with a tin cup between her hands and did not speak for a full minute. Then she said, "Jonas Reid." He said, "Yes. Ride the last 3 weeks." He said, "Ma'am, thank you." He rode the last 3 weeks alongside the wagon train. He kept his distance the first week, out of courtesy. He watered his horse at a different creek and ate his supper at the Coogan wagon, 3 fires from Elsa's. He came to her fire only when the boy Peter waved him over, which Peter did on the 3rd evening. Elsa watched him. Peter was watching her watch. Lucy was watching everybody. On the 5th evening, Elsa herself walked out to Jonas at the horse picket after supper. She said, "Jonas." He said, "Elsa." She said, "You do not need to eat at the Coogan wagon. It is not seemly, and it is not necessary. My children have both looked into your face and found it a plain, honest one. Come to my fire tomorrow evening, and every evening. Bring your own coffee if you like. I will not have my children think their mother is being courted by a man who eats 50 yards down the wagon line." Jonas said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Elsa." He said, "Elsa." She walked back. She did not look over her shoulder. She felt him watching her until she reached her wagon and did not know for a moment what to do with that. He was a very good trail scout. He earned his place by his knowledge of the country and by nothing else. Wagonmaster Coogan, who had taken him on for the last stretch on Elsa's private word, watched him 3 days and then relaxed and let him work. The children took their measure of him. Peter, 18, offered him a plate of stew on the 2nd evening at their fire without asking his mother's permission. Jonas took it gratefully. Peter said, "Mother says you knew her when she was 16. Jonas said, "I did." Peter said, "What was she like?" Jonas said, "She was a girl who could make a good pan of biscuits and read a book at the same time and hold a rifle steady. She was straight and clear and a great deal quieter than the girls of the district. She played chess. Her father had taught her. Nobody at the school could beat her." Peter said, "Mother still plays chess." Jonas said, "I know." Lucy, 15, red-cheeked, took her measure of him differently. She waited 2 weeks. Then, on a bright afternoon with the wagon stopped at midday for water, she came up to Jonas at the creek where he was watering the horses and asked him plainly if he had loved her mother more than her father had. Jonas Reid, who had been unhorsing bushwhackers and calming steers for 20 years, set the bridle down carefully on the log and thought about it. He said, "Ma'am, I loved your mother in a different way than your father did, because I loved her as a boy who had not yet grown up, and your father loved her as a man who had. Your father was a better man for her at 19 than I was at 17. I am not asking to be measured against him. That is not a measurement I would win, and it is not one I would want to win. I would like to try to be a good man for her now, at 38, if she wanted one. That is the whole of it." Lucy said, "That was a good answer." Jonas said, "I have been practicing it for 2 weeks." Lucy laughed. She went back to the wagon. Elsa watched all of this from a distance. They reached Oregon City on a Thursday afternoon in mid-October. Wagonmaster Coogan disbanded the train in the square. There was rejoicing. There were farewells. The Landrys drove east to Salem. The Vaughnans took the north road to Portland. Elsa Callender stood by her own wagon with Peter and Lucy and thought about what she was going to do next. Jonas Reid rode up. He was in his Sunday shirt. He had trimmed his beard and washed his hair in a creek that morning. He said, "Mrs. Callender, Peter, Lucy, My holding is 1 hour east of here at Blue Cove. It is 160 acres of good pasture and a plain house with 3 rooms and a good roof. I would like to invite the 3 of you to ride out with me tomorrow morning and see it, and stay there as long as suits you, while you decide where you would like to settle. I have made arrangements at the hotel in the square for tonight. Please, stay at the hotel tonight. Come out tomorrow. No promises are expected." Peter looked at his mother. Peter said, "I would like to see the holding, Mother." Elsa said, "We will see the holding." They stayed a fortnight at Blue Cove. Peter, who had learned dry goods at his father's knee, walked into Oregon City on the 3rd day and inquired about work. He came home in the evening with an offer from the Oregon Mercantile at fair wages and told his mother he thought he would take it. Lucy took to the goat kid Jonas kept in the yard and took to the country and told her mother on the 5th day that she thought Blue Cove was as pretty a place as she had ever seen. Elsa did not press her either way. Elsa herself walked the pasture. She walked the small orchard. She looked at the plain house. She sat at Jonas's plank table one evening, after Peter and Lucy had gone to bed in the guest room, and looked at Jonas across the table. She said, "Jonas." He said, "Elsa." She said, "I have been a widow 13 months, and I loved my husband very much, and I have been walking in his shadow 4,000 miles. I am not putting him away, because I am here, and you are here. I want that plain." He said, "I understand it plain." She said, "But I have also been walking your shadow 20 years, and I have known it, and I have not admitted it aloud. That is the truth of what a woman may carry, 2 shadows. My husband's for 13 months, and yours for 20 years. I did not lie to Fred. I loved him. But he knew about you. I told him at 19 when he asked me why I wept sometimes, when the paper came, and he had known ever since. He was a great man for it. He was a great man for a great many things." Jonas said, "Fred sounds like a great man." Elsa said, "He was." She said, "So I am asking you to be patient of the 2 shadows. I am not going to be 22 the second time. I am going to be 36. I am going to be a widow who has had a husband and a widow who kept a boy in her heart. I would ask you not to press me toward speed." Jonas said, "Elsa, I have waited 20 years. I am not in a hurry now." She said, "Then I will marry you, Jonas Reid. But I would ask that we take a year to court and that we marry at Blue Cove next October, in the plain, honest calendar of ordinary people, and that Peter and Lucy know from the first day that this is a household of 4 grown people, building on the strength of 2 shadows. That is the household I am willing to build. Are you?" Jonas said, "I am." He put his hand across the plank table. She put hers on top of his. They were married in the yard of the Blue Cove, holding on the 2nd Saturday of October the following year by the circuit preacher out of Oregon City. Peter, 19, gave his mother away. Lucy, 16, stood witness. Wagonmaster Coogan rode down from Portland with his wife. Elsa wore a plain green dress she had sewn herself, and a small knot of prairie yarrow at her collar. Jonas wore his one good coat. Afterward, in the low yellow October light, Elsa walked out with Jonas to the far corner of the pasture where the fence line turned toward the creek. He put his arm around her waist. She leaned her head on his shoulder. She said, "Jonas?" He said, "Elsa." She said, "There is a thing you did not know. In 1868, my mother forgave your father. She had been holding a great deal for a long time, and she let it go on her own deathbed. She never wrote you. She died 3 weeks later. I have carried that forgiveness for you for 20 years. I am giving it to you now." Jonas Reid put his forehead against her temple. He did not weep. He almost did. He said, "Elsa, I am obliged." She said, "Do not be obliged. It was not mine to give. It was hers." He said, "Then I am obliged to your mother, and to you." The pasture stretched out under the October sun. Somewhere behind them, Peter was showing Lucy how to lead a goat kid on a rope. Somewhere farther out along the creek, Wagonmaster Coogan was quietly explaining to his wife why he had liked this particular reunion better than any wedding he had attended in 30 years of leading wagon trains. And Elsa Callender Reid, who had almost married Jonas Reid at 16, and had married Fred Callender at 19, and had walked west, a widow at 36, carrying 2 shadows and 2 children and a bonnet, put her cheek against her second husband's cheek, and understood that the good slow country had, in its good slow way, brought her father's peace and her mother's forgiveness, and her first love's plain patience, across 20 years and 4,000 miles, and had let her marry a boy at 36, not to replace the man she had lost, but to keep the whole rest of the promise she had begun at 16, and never quite been able to put down, and she never had.